All right, welcome to our story-driven content strategy course. Today, we're going to be walking you through a framework and guide for how your ministry can turn a single beneficiary story into a month's worth of social media content. So in today's noisy marketing landscape, it can be daunting and difficult for ministries with limited budgets to try and compete for attention. But with the framework we're going to share with you today, we are confident that the task of filling your annual content strategy will become an attainable and exciting opportunity to bring God glory rather than a daunting and debilitating task to keep up with today's marketing trends. So my name is Zach Layton. In 2011, I founded a nonprofit creative agency called Reliant Creative. And we started the agency with the belief that God is working in powerful ways globally, and that if we could tell those stories, that we could inspire action and mobilize the church. Before we discuss the story content map and strategy we're going to walk through today, I want to share where these ideas come from. So Gary Vaynerchuk is the go-to voice in social media marketing. If a marketer is doing something or saying something, for the most part, it's most likely rooted in some type of Gary Vaynerchuk teaching. Gary V is known for his content output, and the entire premise and summary of everything that he preaches and teaches is centered around attention. Gary would argue that attention is everything. So as ministries, how do we capture the attention of our donors, our potential donors, our volunteers and our staff? And how do we capture that attention where their attention already is? And that last part is key. How do we capture attention where their attention already is? In 2017, Gary came out with a 86-page presentation showing his content strategy process. And it showed how he takes a single piece of pillar content, like a keynote speech or a video, and he turns it into 30 pieces of micro content to be shared across various platforms. And at the end of 2019, IJM took that strategy and they told a single little girl's story over the course of an entire month. And so from a single beneficiary story, IJM made a month's worth of content and rolled that story out on their social platforms over the course of an entire month. And as I watched that campaign roll out, my first thought was, how can we reverse engineer this and apply it to the ministry space and the ministry sector so that the church and nonprofits can create content at scale? So over the last few months, we've done just that. We've taken Gary Vaynerchuk's strategy, we've reversed engineered IGM's Esther story, and we made a couple of tweaks for application in the ministry sector and made sure that everything produced is centered around engaging stories. And we've come away with a framework that will help your ministry create 30 to 60 pieces of content from a single beneficiary story. So to break that down, from a single beneficiary story, that's 2 pieces of content per day for a month, or a piece of content per day for 2 months. Or even more simply, from 6 to 12 beneficiary stories, your ministry can have a story-driven piece of content every single day for an entire year. And if you find yourself or your ministry having difficulty coming up with content to keep your audience's attention, our hope is that this framework is going to help you solve that problem. So today I'm going to be teaching you a strategy for content output that will help you take that single beneficiary story and turn it into a month or potentially 2 months worth of content. We believe that great stories told well can inspire action and mobilize the church around your cause, around your ministry, and around the work God is already doing through your organization. We know that God is working through your ministry, but more often than not, the church is unaware of what God is doing around the world and what he is doing through your organization. And so what would it look like if the church was made aware? What would it look like if we communicated better? What would it look like if we communicated more regularly? What would the church do if she knew what God was doing? We believe that she would invest more, that she would pray more, and that she would be involved more with what he's already doing. But we need to tell the church what's going on. We need to communicate what God is doing. how he is moving, how he is rescuing, and how he is redeeming. And if we can do that, first and foremost, we're going to bring him glory. And secondarily, we'll help the church know where and how she can get involved more often to partner with and to join in with what God is already doing. And so today we're going to show you how to take a single story and turn it into a significant amount of content to start bridging that gap between the incredible stories and things that God is doing and the regularity at which we tell those stories. But first, I want to talk about why I think content is important. Why is storytelling important? Why am I encouraging you guys so relentlessly to create content and tell stories? I believe that this stuff matters for the ministry and for your ministry because we are fighting for attention. We touched on this when we introduced Gary Vaynerchuk earlier, but attention is key. And we are fighting for that attention. Your ministry, your cause, your calling is worth investment. It's worthy of investment. It's worth someone's time. It's worth their energy, their money, and most importantly, it's worth their prayers. But what does the church pray for when she's not informed? What do we pray for when we don't know what God is doing globally? In order to be successful, especially with new audiences, we have to go where attention is, and we have to tell stories that engage. We all know where audience attention is, right? It's on social media. And so it's on mobile devices and screens and tablets. It's on laptops. Attention is on the latest streaming service and the latest social media platform. Every year, the statistics show more and more of people's time is spent in front of a screen or in front of a device. So every year, video content consumption rises by 100% or more. I recently heard a stat that 85% of all clicks online will be on video content within the next few years. A Facebook executive recently predicted that Facebook will be 100% video and no text by 2021. That's this year. We're currently in 2021. And that's a Facebook executive predicting that for the platform. So if you want your ministry to be successful, you have to figure out a way to grab the attention of your audience where their attention lies. If you want to reach new audiences, we have to go where their attention lies. In a few of our other courses, you've heard me talk about content categories, and I encourage you to create content that is informative, educational, and inspiring. And in our other courses, I break that down and what kind of content fits within these three categories. But the idea is to help your ministry categorize and come up with plans for creating different kinds of content that you can use to keep your audience communicated with on a regular basis. But today, we're going to focus on the inspiring content piece. This entire course and everything that we're going to discuss today is designed to help you create inspiring content. And if you follow today's plan, you could potentially, again, fill out your entire year with daily content that is centered around inspiring, motivational, and emotionally engaging story content. And then imagine adding your informational and your educational content to that plan and strategy. So following this plan would give your ministry a content output that could and would mirror the largest brands and the largest organizations in the world. And hopefully we finally have a plan for breaking through the noise and making our voices heard. Now, I can encourage you to create storytelling content for your audience where their attention lies, but I also know and realize that that's a big ask, right? It's daunting, it's overwhelming. Over the last decade, we've noticed a couple reoccurring pain points for ministries. Ministries generally struggle with a lack of time and small budgets and a lack of marketing experience. You don't have time to tell your stories. You don't have the funds to tell them with the regularity and the quality that's required in today's marketing landscape. And most ministry leaders struggle to market their organizations well and keep up with the noise. But marketing and storytelling are incredibly important and incredibly powerful. With well-done marketing and storytelling, you can grow your ministries, you can grow your reach, and you can grow your audience retention, loyalty, and advocacy. And at the end of the day, you can build a brand. And these are the pain points we're trying to solve or help you solve especially with this course specifically. This course is designed to help you create content at scale. And when I say at scale, I mean with regularity. If we're going to be effective at grabbing the attention of our audience on the platforms where they spend their time, we have to figure out a way to add value to that audience. Why would someone want to consume your video? Why would someone want to come to your website? Why would someone want to click that give button, right? I believe that it starts with adding value, with providing value up front. And if you can figure out a way to add value to your audience without asking something from them, then you'll have a far greater chance of getting that person to give when you finally do make that financial ask. And I believe furthermore that in the ministry setting, there's no better way to add value than sharing the story of a transformed life. There is intrinsic value in connecting someone to the story of a transformed life. And this is incredibly important news because coming up with new, exciting, and engaging content on a consistent basis is really difficult, right? Especially in a ministry context where your primary job and your primary calling is not content production. So coming up with new ideas for content engagement or a new exciting plan that will engage your audience can be daunting. It can be overwhelming. And so with this strategy, you don't have to worry about coming up with something new every day or every week. The focus can turn from scratching your head over what new content to create to focusing on simply documenting what God is already doing through your organization. This is a gigantic shift in mindset for most ministry leaders. We've already established that God is working through your organization, right? If that's true, all we have to do is capture the stories of life transformation and share the testimonial stories of life transformation that God is doing in people's lives. He's doing all the work, right? All we have to do is capture or document those stories and tell them to the world or share them with the world. So there's value in sharing those stories. And as an individual who has been transformed by Christ, I'm going to love, appreciate, enjoy, be entertained by, and engage with stories of other people who are being transformed by and for Christ. And so as believers, we know that this is the power of testimony. If you tell me these stories on the platforms where my attention already is, then I'm going to connect with your brand. And remember, though, you have to be careful that you don't make your audience consume content on the platforms where their attention isn't, but share them where people already are. Charity Water founder Scott Harrison has a great quote. He says, "Our hearts don't respond to data and statistics. Stories have the power to make us feel." And I want you guys to keep in mind this quote as we walk through this course today. Your ministry communication and your marketing content must be story driven. It's okay to share your data and your statistics and your strategies, but only after you've engaged your audience with story. And you can create resource content that adds value to your audience and builds trust, but your stories are going to be the things that emotionally engage your audience more than anything else. If you've taken our other courses, you've heard me say this before. In the ministry sector, where we are all working to rescue orphans and sex slaves, or our ministries are healing and feeding the poor, lives are being drastically transformed through our organizations. It is easy to look at ourselves as the hero and then communicate through all of our marketing efforts that we are the hero who needs donors' funds to continue our great work. And we have to think differently if our storytelling and our marketing efforts are going to find success. And so if you take away anything from this course, just remember this: you and your ministry are not the hero. Your donor and the beneficiary are the hero. Your donor and your beneficiary must be the hero in your marketing efforts. Especially when we start telling stories, the beneficiary story is the most powerful tool we have in ministry. It's the story this entire course and content strategy are built on. And those are the stories you'll have constant content to pull from, because God is always at work transforming lives. So this idea is a bit, again, of a mindset shift, but I want you to think about your ministry as a mentor that guides your hero along a journey, whether that hero is your beneficiary or whether that hero is your donor. Your ministry is the guide, and you're guiding and directing and leading and coaching and mentoring the donor and the beneficiary along a journey. It's no secret at this point, I believe that God loves stories. We know that humans love stories. Storytelling is at the core of how we communicate, right? We love movies and TV shows. We love reading books around grand adventures. We pay money to see storytelling in comedy and theater. We tell stories to our friends about our adventures or our struggles. We subscribe to Netflix and Hulu, Disney Plus, Apple TV, Prime TV, and the endless list of other streaming services because we love stories. Story is deeply ingrained in our psyche. And as Christians, we should understand this better than anyone. God has chosen to communicate to us via story, right? What is scripture but a collection of true stories? And I believe that God is serious about stories, and he wants us to tell the stories of how he's working as often as possible, both by sharing our own stories and our own testimonies and by sharing the stories and testimonies of others. If we look at what scripture says is one of our most powerful tools for sharing the gospel, it's our personal testimonies, right? Scripture tells us that our own personal testimony is one of the most powerful tools in sharing the gospel. And what is our testimony but our own personal story of transformation? Revelation 12:11 says, "And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death." 1 Timothy 6:12 says, "Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and about which you made the good confession in the presence of many witnesses." And in Acts 22:1-21, Paul gives his own testimony, and then he gives it again in Acts 26:1-32. God is serious about stories because he knows that we are emotionally engaged by, encouraged by, edified by, and transformed by stories. Stories are powerful, and in this course, we're going to explore how you can tell those stories and tell more stories more often and start competing for attention in a world where attention's so difficult to attain. All right. So before we get started, where your stories land is important. Being successful on all these platforms can be overwhelming. It's unrealistic to be successful in all of these platforms, especially for most ministries. The list of social platforms increases almost daily. You need to be aware of and informed on what platforms exist, but it's rarely going to make sense to put time and effort into every single one of these. If you add the podcasting apps available, it can be even more daunting, right? You have the option to push your podcast from a single location onto all these platforms. So that can make things easier in the podcasting space, but still it's overwhelming. There's a almost infinite number of social platforms now, and it's ever growing and constantly increasing. So what I'm going to recommend is that you put your focus on a handful of social platforms that make the most sense to your ministry and the audience that you're trying to reach. So if you're a youth ministry, you're probably going to focus on platforms like TikTok and Snapchat. If your ministry provides leadership training to pastors, it might make more sense to put a lot of your efforts into things like LinkedIn and Facebook and podcasts. Where your focus lies depends on where your audience spends their time. And just because World Vision has a YouTube channel and Instagram account, that doesn't mean that that's what makes sense for your ministry. And if you're wondering where your audience spends their time, ask them. Especially as you start down this road of content production. Start small and add platforms as you get the hang of things and as you figure different platforms out. If you try to focus on too many platforms, you're likely going to burn out. And so the key to success on social media requires a great deal of content, a great deal of engagement. And you only have so much time in the day to create content and engage online. And so focus your efforts and then build off of the foundation that you develop. We'll be using these platforms that you see here on the screen now as the example list of social platforms for today's course, but please make adjustments to the platforms that you use as you build your content strategy map for your specific ministry. And it's going to be different for every single ministry. So now that you've established the platforms you'll be focusing on for your ministry, we can dive into the content strategy framework. All right. So we're going to walk through what we call the story content strategy. Gary Vaynerchuk calls this the content pyramid. And the model is structured like a reverse pyramid. At the top, you'll have a piece of pillar content or multiple pieces of pillar content. And then in this example, we'll be using a 2-part video and a 5-part podcast for our pillar content. And once you've created or documented your pillar content, you'll repurpose that content into micro content and then distribute it across your communication platforms of choice. All right, so we start the process with a pillar piece of content. Generally, we want you to focus on capturing and documenting a beneficiary's testimonial story of transformation. So if it makes sense for your ministry, you can also document a digital event or a digital summit. Maybe you're a pastor teaching other pastors leadership training and you do a digital summit. That can serve as your pillar piece of content. 2020 was obviously a unique year for ministries all over the world. And so digital events became pretty popular. So that type of event can serve as a great way to create a pillar piece of content simply by recording the event and turning it into a video file. This is a great way to create pillar content. And now that digital interaction and digital summits and digital events are a regular occurrence and an expectation for donors and potential donors and audiences, we can begin creating content in that digital space with greater regularity. All right, we've stated that God is at work in your ministry, right? He's transforming lives through your organization. And if you can focus on documenting those stories of life transformation, you'll have endless content to pull from, as long as God continues to work through your organization and your ministry. So all of the content in this content strategy will derive from your single beneficiary story. This is powerful because you don't have to come up with a new story every single day. Over the course of a year, you can tell, like we talked about earlier, those 6 to 12 stories, and then fill your entire year's content strategy with daily content. We've created a story content map. This is a free downloadable resource on our website. And the pillar content we use in that content map example is a 2-part video and that 5-part podcast we talked about in the last slide. Everything else in that map is pulled from those 2 pieces of pillar content. So earlier in this course, I touched on IGM's Esther story. Much of the ideas we're exploring in today's course derive from watching the rollout of Esther's story. So IGM told Esther's story in a 2-part video and a 5-part podcast, just like we'll walk through today. So those pieces of content served as the pillar content from which all of the other content was pulled, and they rolled that story out over the course of a month. The next phase in this story content strategy is micro content. So once you've created your pillar content, you'll want to pull pieces of micro content from those stories. So this can be short trailers or highlights for promotional purposes. A trailer could run on Instagram TV, letting people know what's coming. Micro content can be images pulled from the story that run on Facebook with a quick quote or an excerpt from the beneficiary's interview. Micro content can be memes or your favorite clips from the film that you've created. The possibilities are really endless for micro content, but at the end of the day, you're giving little snippets of the story and sharing them across your different platforms as a way to point people back to or point people towards the pillar content. And then once you've got your pillar content and your micro content created, you'll want to create a schedule for the rollout of that content and start distributing that content across your social platforms. Again, we've provided an example that you can follow in the resources page of our website, so you don't have to build something from scratch. We provided that for you. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's nice to have as much of your month's content built out and ready and planned before the month starts so that you're not scrambling to create micro content on the fly. And so your months of these stories might overlap with each other, but you want to have as much of the content going into the strategy as possible so that you're not scrambling to create stuff. So now that we've seen the strategy from a high level, let's walk through what this looks like in practice. So first, we're going to document a beneficiary's story. Remember, we're using the term document because your job is not to come up with creative storytelling off the top of your head. Your job is to document what God is doing through your ministry, through the lives of the beneficiaries that he's transforming lives in. And so you'll want to find a beneficiary story that you think is powerful and establish that story as the pillar content for this first step. So here are some great examples of pillar content. We've touched on these already, but I'll reiterate again. For the example we've provided in our content strategy map, we used a 2-part video and a 5-part podcast as the pillar content. We were able to turn that pillar content into over 60 pieces of content spread out across an entire month. So you could either spread that out across 2 months, or you could do a single video or a smaller 2 to 3 part podcast and come away with somewhere around 30 pieces of content for the month. What I want to continue reiterating is that you focus on a beneficiary's story. And so if you can't come up with 60 pieces of content, 30 is okay. If you can't come up with 30, 15 is okay. But we're going to start with the beneficiary's story, establish the pillar content around that, and then pull micro content from that pillar story. Once you've got your pillar content, you're going to create micro content. Micro content is simply repurposed pieces of content from your pillar content. So you're not recreating anything here. You're just pulling small snippets of the story and sharing them across your platforms as a means to point your audience back towards your pillar content. Micro content is short form pieces of content pulled from your pillar content. So for example, if a pillar piece of content is a 4 to 5 minute film, your micro content might be a 15-second clip from that film, or an image of the character in your story that's paired with a written quote that's pulled from the interview. It could be a little meme, an image with a meme from or a quote from the story pulled from that interview, or a little write-up that goes with an image. Really, again, the micro content pieces are endless. Your micro content is essentially, at the end of the day, all of the best moments from your pillar content that are used to point your audience back to your pillar content. So if your pillar content runs on YouTube, Instagram TV, Facebook, and your favorite podcasting app, then your micro content is going to be distributed on those platforms, plus all of the other platforms that you're using to point your user or audience back to those primary platforms. So an Instagram image with text or image with a quote might point the audience to your Insta TV film, or a short article on LinkedIn or Medium might point to the story on Facebook. A blog post highlighting the story might point to the video on YouTube. So as you create your micro content, the key to remember is that you're looking for moments in the story that are the best moments to share. What pieces resonate with you? What pieces do you think will resonate with your audience? Those are the small snippets and the clips that you want to repurpose into micro content. So now we're at step 3, right? Once we've got your pieces of micro content and you've plugged them into your distribution strategy or plugged them into a framework that we've provided, it's time to start distributing. So this visual representation, this is a visual representation of the strategy. And the benefit of this strategy is that you're saturating the social landscape with your story. If you were to create a 5-minute film, upload it to YouTube, and hope it got views, the reality is that that strategy is never going to cut through the noise and the clutter of the internet. There's just too much content to compete with. So remember back to the beginning of this course, our goal is attention. So posting a 5-minute film and hoping it gets attention or hoping it gets views is insane. Your film will get lost in the busyness of the internet. Your micro content is going to push your audience back to the pillar pieces of content that you want your audience to see. The micro content is going to be the thing that drives engagement and consumption of your pillar content stories. The first round of micro content is ultimately used to drive views back to the pillar content you shared on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram TV as examples. The same goes for your pillar podcast content. Your micro content will drive back to the podcast for listens and for downloads. So we're pushing your audience back to your pillar stories. You're encouraging your audience to engage. You're saying, hey, look over here, look over here. We have something worth your attention. Now, to provide a little side note, this is why the quality of your pillar content is so important. If you're going to be screaming and yelling for attention, if you're going to promote and push your micro content in order to get people to consume your pillar content needs to be worth their time. Otherwise, they're not going to come back next time. So that's why we encourage using the hero's journey story structure so strongly when you're creating your pillar content, because it's so important that your audience is emotionally engaged by your story. And the hero's journey is a story structure that we know relates to and engages with people really well. And so make sure you're putting time and you're putting effort into your pillar content to make sure it's quality. Otherwise, your audience is likely not going to come back the next time you try to tell a story or share a story. And it doesn't mean it has to be a high production value video story, although those are helpful. We can create good stories with low production value as long as we have a good story structure to follow. And so that's why that's our storytelling course where we walk through the hero's journey is so important for you guys to understand structures that engage with people and that we know are going to engage your audience and fit your stories into those structures that engage well. All right, so we've reached the part of this course that's not outlined in our free content strategy map. And this is possibly the most important piece of our content or our current marketing landscape. In our storytelling structures course, I gave a quick history lesson on the progression of storytelling, and we discussed how we're coming out of the broadcast era into a pseudo-oral tradition. So in the days of TV and radio, the audience never had an opportunity to engage with the content they were consuming. We, as the audience, didn't ever get a chance to have a discussion around the content we were consuming in TV and radio. And in today's world, there's an opportunity for engagement and community development around the stories and the content that we share. And so this provides an incredible opportunity to build relationships with the people consuming your content. And this provides an opportunity for your audience to have a real relationship with your brand. And so that goes back to making sure that your brand and your ministry are a character within your stories. Because people engage with characters much more than they engage with organizations and ministry, corporate manifestos, and the things of that nature. We've discussed this in our purpose-driven story course. You always want to be on the lookout for ways in which you can help your audience or our audience connect to your brand. Remember, people relate to, I said this earlier in the last slide, they relate to characters and personalities and people more than they relate to data and statistics and companies. One of the incredible things about social media is that it is social by nature. Your brand has the opportunity to have a personality. It has the opportunity to connect with people, to build relationship with real people. And this is the reason continued and consistent content production is so important. You want to create consistent content strategies so that we have constant and regular opportunities to engage with people online, to build relationships with real people who can really connect with your brand and ultimately really invest with real money in your organization and share your ministry with their networks. So with all that said, once you've started distributing your pillar content and your micro content, please, please, please don't just broadcast it and hope people watch. engage with people, listen to people, watch the comments and engage with those individuals that are commenting on your content. Use the opportunity to listen to what people think of your content and respond when they comment on your stuff. This is how you can begin to create a personality for your ministry and your brand that an audience can connect with, because the brand is functioning like a person, because it is a real person, right? There's someone really behind those messages and those responses. It is a real person that is building community behind the scenes on behalf of the brand. So this, again, another reason why consistent communication and clarity of messaging are so important. That points us back to our story-driven messaging course. If you have someone on your team who is communicating on behalf of your brand, they need to know the brand tone, the brand voice, the brand persona, and the clear words required to talk about your ministry clearly with the audience that's engaging with the brand. So stage 4 is also an opportunity for you to listen and see what kind of content people are engaging with. So if you find that one piece of micro content that is doing really well and you're seeing a great deal of engagement around that piece because you've been listening and you've been paying attention, you'll know that that's the kind of content you want to double down on and continue creating in the future. So if you're listening, you'll also be able to determine what platforms you're seeing the most success on. If people are engaging with your content and your brand on YouTube, but nobody wants to comment or view your content on Facebook, that's going to be a good indicator of where your audience spends their attention and spends their time. And that's where you'll want to continue to focus your time and energy on future content. All right, so now that we've looked at the content strategy from a high level, and hopefully you understand the structure and the basic framework, let's take a look at what this actually looks like over the course of a month. So I've said a couple times in this course already that we've created a map for what a month's worth of content could look like if you pulled micro content from a single beneficiary story. So we're going to spend some time walking through this content strategy today. This is simply a guide. And I want to reiterate that you should be making changes to this content map based on the platforms that you're currently using. We've used the basics like Facebook, Instagram, and Instagram TV. But if you use Snapchat, LinkedIn, and TikTok, please make the changes to this guide and apply the strategy to those platforms. I also want to note that this guide will only help you with steps 1 through 3, right? Remember, step 4 is listen, and there will be following steps to come. This content strategy map does not provide guidance on creating content based around the type of content your audience is engaging with. It's simply designed to get you started creating content on a regular basis and to serve as a rollout framework for your content. It's also designed to show you just how much content that you can get from a single story. And I apologize, I'm saying content a lot in this course, but that's just the nature of it. All right, so I'm going to walk through an entire month. This is all based on the pillar content we talked about earlier. So we've got a 2-part video on a single beneficiary story, and we've got a 5-episode podcast on that same beneficiary story. So those are serving as our pillar pieces of content. So on Monday, the 1st of the month, we're going to send an Instagram post out that is sharing what's coming. We're going to do the same on Facebook, and we're going to send out an email blast to our audience with an image with text sharing what's coming. So this is the, hey, stay tuned, we've got something exciting for you coming piece of content. Tuesday on YouTube, we're going to post a video highlighting that's a highlight or a trailer of the video. We're going to post a video that's a highlight of the trailer on Instagram TV as well. Wednesday of that month, we're going to post on Facebook the video highlight or the trailer, and then we're going to change our Facebook cover for the campaign. On Thursday, we're going to post to YouTube. We're going to post part 1 of the video. That's our first pillar piece of content. We're going to post on Facebook that same video, part 1, and we're going to send an email blast out to our audience with video part 1 showing that video, that first pillar piece of content video form. Friday, we're going to post on Instagram TV video part 1. We're going to post an Instagram post with an image sharing the Instagram TV post. So that Instagram post is going to point back to the Instagram TV post. And then we're going to share a story, an Instagram story, and link to the IGTV or the Instagram TV video in our Instagram story. Monday of the following week, we're going to post an Instagram post that's going to show a 30-second excerpt from episode 1 of the podcast, and that will link to that episode of the podcast in whatever podcast platform you want to use. On Facebook, we're going to share a Facebook story with a short video from part 1. That's going to be our best clip from that video. And then we're going to share on our podcasting apps. We're going to post episode 1 across the website and push it to all of our apps, our podcasting apps. On Tuesday, we're going to post on Facebook a 30-second podcast excerpt from that podcast. So just our favorite part from that episode and share it on Facebook. On Wednesday, we're going to post to our email list an email blast sharing podcast episode 1 and an Instagram story sharing the best clip from the video that we shared earlier in the week. Thursday, we're going to post on episode 2 of the podcast on all of our podcasting apps. And then we're also going to share on Facebook a 30-second excerpt that is going to link to and post back or link the user back to that podcast episode 2. On Friday, we're going to do an Instagram post with another 30-second excerpt on Instagram, connecting the user to episode 2. And then we're going to write a blog article or post a pre-written blog article that shares part 1 of the story on a blog with some images. And then on Instagram, we're going to post a link, maybe an image with a link saying, hey, we just posted a blog post, point the user and link them back to that blog article. On Monday, we're going to post part 2 of the video on Instagram TV. On Facebook, we're going to also post part 2 of the video. So again, that's the second part of the pillar piece of content video. On Instagram, we're going to post an image sharing our Instagram TV post and linking our post to the Instagram video. And then on Instagram stories, we're going to link the Instagram video or the Instagram TV video in an Instagram story. Tuesday, we're going to share on YouTube a post video, and we're going to post video part 2. We're going to send out an email blast, letting our audience know in our email blast that episode 2 of our video is live, and we're going to link to it. And then on Facebook, we're going to post a post linking to the blog article part 1 from the previous Friday. Wednesday, we're going to send an email blast again to our email list sharing video part 2. On Instagram, we're going to share an Instagram story with the best clip from the short video of part 1. So our favorite clip from that video, part 2. And then Facebook, we're going to have an image with a quote from the video or from the podcast. On Thursday, we're going to post episode 3 of the podcast. On Instagram, we're going to post an image with a quote from the video or the podcast. And then we're going to post part 2 of our story on our blog with images. On Friday, we're going to do an Instagram post, maybe a 30-second excerpt from the podcast of episode 3. So that's going to link to on Instagram to all of our episode 2 or episode 3 of the podcast. We're going to do the same thing on Facebook. And then on Facebook that same day, we're going to share a Facebook story with a short best clip video from the pillar content part 2. And then on Instagram, we're going to post a Instagram post that links to blog article part 2. Monday, we're going to do an image on Facebook with a quote from our video or our podcast. We're going to post on Instagram an image with a quote from the video or the podcast. And then we're going to send an email blast for the podcast episode 3, pointing our audience to podcast episode 3. And then Tuesday, we're going to post podcast episode 4. We're going to post a 30-second excerpt from that podcast on Instagram that links to that podcast. And then on Facebook, we're going to post a post that links to the blog article part 2 from the previous week. And then Wednesday, we're going to post a Facebook story, and we're going to go live with a story, question and answer story about the story. So this is opportunity to create some behind the scenes stories and some engagement with our audience to talk about the story in greater detail, for them to ask questions about the beneficiary that we've told the story of. And then Instagram story, we're going to do the exact same thing, do a live Instagram story, question and answer about the story, do some behind the scenes engagement with the audience. And then on Thursday, we're going to post on Facebook a 30-second excerpt pointing the audience and user back to episode 4 of the podcast. We can do another image with a quote from the video pillar or the podcast pillar content on Facebook. And then we're going to post part 3 of the blog article, sharing the story on our blog with images and text. And Friday, we're going to send out an email blast, sending our users to episode 4 of the podcast. We're going to post on Instagram, linking to the blog article part 3 from the previous day. We're going to post the episode 5 of the podcast on all of our podcasting apps, and we're going to post a 30-second excerpt from that podcast episode 5 on our Instagram, linking to that podcast episode 5. And then Monday, we're going to post on Facebook that same 30-second excerpt, pointing our Facebook audience to our episode 5 podcast episode. Post on Instagram an image with a quote from the video or the podcast. And then on Facebook, we're going to post linking our audience to the blog article part 3 from the previous Thursday. And then day 31 of the month, a final email blast sending our audience to episode 5 of the podcast, a Facebook post with a wrap-up quote or a final quote from the story, and then an Instagram quote or post with an image and a quote or a meme from the video or the podcast. And so again, feel free to make adjustments to the schedule as it fits the needs and the working hours of your ministry. We've not included Saturday and Sunday because most ministries don't work on those days. But if you want to schedule these with some scheduling apps and roll these out across Saturdays and Sundays, feel free to do so. But this is a good example of how you can create a good chunk of content on a daily basis over the course of a month from a single beneficiary story and 2 pieces of pillar content. All right, so let's run through a quick example for a single beneficiary story. All right, first things first, you're going to need to find your beneficiary story, right? In this example, we're going to capture their testimony with video. Feel free to use our interview question guide. It's a free resource on our resources page, and it will help you ask the right questions to get the right answers to fill out the hero's journey story structure. So once you've got your testimony interview done on film, capture your B-roll content to make the video fun, creative, and more engaging. You'll also want to turn the audio from the interview into a podcast, or you can record a separate podcast where you'll tell the story and maybe share behind the scenes insights into how you found the story. This is the approach that IGM took when they told Esther's story. So be sure to check out Esther's story on the New Activist podcast and see how they handled and created the 5-episode podcast with that story. So once you've got your pillar content created, you're going to take the best moments, the best clips, the quotes and images, and short snippets from your pillar content and create micro content. If you can, You'll also want to tell the story in a blog series on your blog. Do the same thing natively. If you do a blog article on your blog, do the same thing natively on LinkedIn and share that same written content in an email drip campaign. So these articles can share additional thoughts or insights that weren't in the testimonial video or the podcast, but be sure to continue following the hero's journey structure that we've outlined in some of our other courses as you create that content. Our script writing course would also be a great tool for creating written blog story type content. Now, once we've got all of your content created, we're going to follow that content strategy map that we just walked through as you distribute the content onto all of your platforms, and alter the rollout to fit your ministry needs again and the platforms that your ministry uses most. But the content strategy map should be a great starting point to content rollout. And if you can only manage to come up with half of what we've outlined in that strategy, you will still have a piece of content for every single day of the month. If you go through that content strategy, I think we have 62 pieces of content in that month that we just walked through earlier. So start somewhere. And once you get into the rhythm of creating content and sharing stories with your audience without some financial ask, then you can begin working your way towards the full content strategy plan. So if you can start with 15 pieces of content in the month, that's a great place to start and work your way up to what we've outlined in the map. Once your content has been shared, we're going to, again, be ready to listen and engage with your audience and create additional micro content based on what people are engaging with. We don't outline the listen and engage part in our content strategy map again that we walked through already, because that will be dependent on your audience and their engagement, but we'll walk through those stages in a minute. I also want to run through a quick example for a digital training event or a digital summit example. So you've got your speaking event, or you're doing an online training for pastors. Under this framework, you would record that content and you've got your video. If it's long enough, you could turn it into a 2 to 3 part video series. Then immediately extract the audio from that piece of content and create a podcast episode or a series of episodes. So those pieces of content will serve again as your pillar content. Now take a handful of the best moments from that video and turn them into your best moments clips. If you took photos of the presenter during the event, pair those with quotes and written content, sharing the ideas that you presented at the event. If you didn't take photos, capture screenshots from the video and share those quotes and written content, sharing the ideas from the event. On your blog, email, or a platform like Medium, create a series of articles where you add additional thoughts to what was discussed at the digital event, or articles where you simply rehash the topics discussed in written form. So all of these pieces of micro content will serve to point your audience back to your speaking event or your digital summit pillar content. And then from there, again, we simply follow the schedule that we've outlined, or an alternate or an altered one to fit your ministry needs. And then again, listen to your audience and engage with them around the content that you've shared. The pieces that you show that they show the most interest in will guide you to the types of additional micro content you'll want to continue creating as you move forward. All right, so in the previous 2 slides, I hinted at additional micro content based on the engagement of your audience. So in step 4 of this course, I said that it's important to listen to your audience and to watch how they are engaging with your content. It's important to build relationships and have conversations around the content that you're sharing. If you're listening to your audience, you'll be able to see the types of content that they are engaging with and commenting on most. So those are the types of micro content that you'll want to continue to push in the future, and the types of micro content that you'll want to create more of from this single story. Now, community informed micro content is optional, but it can increase your content production And they are especially useful. This community-informed micro content is especially useful for engaging with and providing value for your audience. Again, these steps are not included in our story content map PDF. If you were to create a community-informed micro content, you'd potentially be able to create even more than 60 pieces of content from a single story. Our hope is that you'll start using that content map as a starting point and then slowly work your way up to these next steps, step 5 and step 6. Getting in the habit of listening and engaging with your audience and then creating more content that is similar to what they're engaging with is a skill that takes time to master. So play around with it, but always engage and always listen. Again, this is where the power of social media really shines. This is where you get the opportunity to give your brand personality. This is the area where you can really help your audience connect with the personality of your brand, the personality of your ministry. And again, that's how you build brand loyalty and brand advocacy. This content strategy framework is designed to help you fill a month's worth of content. Again, repeat the process every month to fill out your entire year's content strategy. But it's important to note that the community-informed micro content doesn't have to be shared within this single month, right? The community-informed content can roll out into the following months as the audience continues to engage with your content from the previous month. So there can absolutely be overlap between community-informed micro content being shared while another story is being rolled out. So you can be pointing back to last month's pillar content with your community-informed content from that pillar content, while the next month's content strategy is being played out for the next beneficiary story. All right, as you listen to your audience, you're going to be able to see the types of micro content that your audience is engaging with. And this is the type of additional micro content that you'll create for your second round of community-informed micro content. So if your audience is engaging with images and quotes, provide more images and quotes. If they're engaging with 30-second highlight clips or the best moment video from your film, create additional highlight clips. Now we're to step 6. And we are rinsing and repeating the distribution process again from step 3 in this framework. So roll your new community-informed micro content out to all of your channels and on a schedule that fits your needs, and be ready to engage again with this new content. Again, to reiterate, this step is not in our content strategy map resource. This is an additional step that will help you guys produce additional content and engage with your audience, but you can still use our content strategy resource as a tool for helping you create your rollout schedule for this second distribution process. And here's the process from start to finish with community insight and community informed micro content pieces added to the process. So start with creating pillar content around a single beneficiary story. We did a 2-part video and a 5-part podcast in our example. We shared that pillar content on platforms that are designed to hold longer form video content like Facebook, Instagram TV, YouTube, and your podcasting app of choice. Once you've got your pillar content created, pull your micro content from that pillar content in the form of images and texts, images and quotes, your best clips, short stories, and articles rolled out on your blog, LinkedIn, Medium, and in email campaigns. And then distribute all of that content following our content strategy map schedule, and then listen and engage with your audience. And as you listen and engage, you'll start to pick up on community insights, and your community and audience will let you know the types of content they like to engage with the most. So from those insights, create additional pieces of micro content that are similar in format to the pieces you're seeing the most engagement with and distribute those on a similar cycle. So this is the rhythm we want to help you get into so that you're always sharing transformational, testimonial, documentary style stories and creating engaging content for your audience. So with this rhythm, you'll be able to fill out a year's worth of content from 6 to 12 stories without a financial ask. You will be providing value for your audience on a regular basis because, again, there is intrinsic value in the sharing of a story of a transformed life. Now let's look at a case study to show how this can be done. I'm going to use IGM's Esther story because it was the story and the rollout schedule that first got us excited about this potential storytelling strategy. All right, let's start with Instagram. Remember, IGM's story is about a little girl named Esther. The entire campaign is centered around her story. So on November 7th, 2019, IGM teased the story and shared what was coming. It was basically a stay tuned type post. On the 12th, they shared an excerpt from the first episode of their 5-part podcast. This 30-second excerpt was a short little clip sharing the best one-line quote from that episode of the podcast. And it was just a little 30-second audio clip with an image. On the 15th of November, IJM shared the first part of their 2-part video, and they shared it on Instagram TV and highlighted a clip from that Instagram TV post on their feed. On the 17th, they shared a 30-second excerpt from episode 2 of their podcast. On the 21st, they shared an excerpt from episode 3 of their podcast on Instagram. And on the 22nd, they shared a part 2 of the video series on Instagram TV, and they highlighted it on their feed. On the 25th of November, the 4th episode of the podcast was shared with an excerpt post on Instagram. And it's important to note that with each of these podcast excerpt posts, they shared the link to the actual episode in their Instagram profile bio. On December 7th, IGM shared episode 5 of the podcast with an excerpt on Instagram pointing to that episode in their profile bio. And then finally, on December 11th, they shared the full video story, part 1 and part 2, on their Instagram TV and highlighted that video in their feed. And then the last post on the 11th included a financial ask that was linked to a matching fund. So over the course of the month, IGM had 9 pieces of content for Instagram alone from this one beneficiary story. Moving over to Facebook, while all that was happening on Instagram, IGM was doing the same thing on Facebook. On Facebook, they ran almost identical pieces of content contextualized for Facebook. Remember, we always want to be contextually relevant on the platforms to which we're posting. So on Facebook, they changed their profile on the 7th. They added a teaser for what was coming on the 12th, and they shared their first podcast episode on the 15th with a similar 30-second audio-driven excerpt paired with image and some text in the post. On the 15th, they also shared the first episode of the video series. On the 16th, episode 2 of the podcast went live with a 30-second excerpt post and a link to the episode with a bit.ly link. And then on the 21st, IGM shared episode 3 of the podcast with another 30-second excerpt and a bit.ly link linking to that episode on the New Activist podcast. On the 25th, they shared episode 4, and on the 7th of December, they posted episode 5 of the podcast series. And then lastly, IGM shared the full video story and again, their financial ask with the matching fund. They also linked to the video to YouTube with a bit.ly link. So with Facebook and another 9 pieces of content, IJM is up to 18 pieces of content from a single beneficiary story just on 2 platforms. Moving over to YouTube, IJM shared a trailer of Esther's story on November 20th. On the 18th, so these are reversed, they shared part 1 of her story. And then on December 5th, they shared part 2 of the story. So between Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, IJM has 21 pieces of content from a single beneficiary story. And notice that all of this is just promotional micro pieces of content pointing back to the pillar content. But they have 21 pieces of content from a beneficiary story. And this does not include IJM's Twitter feed, their LinkedIn content, the email campaign that they ran along with this story, and the actual podcast episodes that they shared on the New Activist, and then the blog articles that they wrote around this story. So this is a great example of how you can turn a single beneficiary story into a month's worth of content. This is how we can take our ministry beneficiary stories and we can pull content from these stories over the course of a month. IJM easily has 30 plus pieces of content from this single story. And you can see from this example that all they really did was post the actual pillar content and then with some very minimal promotional micro content to pull the audience back to that pillar content. So with this model, your ministry can fill an entire year's worth of communication, fill that out with just 12 beneficiary stories. And then if you mix in your traditional communication, your ministry is probably already doing your newsletters, your random updates, your ministry updates, your educational content about your cause or the region in which your ministry works, you've got more content that you'll know what to do with. The second case study I want to share is Frontier Alliance International. I've highlighted this ministry in a handful of our other courses because I think that they have one of the best content strategies of any ministry that I've ever seen. So we don't have time to go into detail on their strategy because it would take far too much time. But I share FAI because I want to encourage you to start following how this ministry produces and distributes content. More than any other organization I've found, FAI, and I've said this before in other courses, but FAI follows the Red Bull marketing mindset. As good, if not better, than some of the largest organizations I've seen. In the same way that Red Bull acts as if they are a media company that just so happens to sell an energy drink, FAI acts as a media ministry that just so happens to provide relief work and disciple-making training in the Middle East. So between their multiple podcasts, the articles that they write, the news updates they share on the Middle East, the informational-based ministry updates that they share, and all of the video content that they produce, or the video content that they have their ministry partners produce, FAI is putting out at the very least a piece of content per day, oftentimes multiple pieces of content per day. And they share this content across all of their social platforms, and they share it on their FAI app, which is where they hold all of their content. Now, my one critique of FAI's content is that they don't focus their content on stories as much as I'd like to see. Much of their content is based around educational content, informational content, news content, Bible study content. But I share this ministry as a great example of a ministry to follow because they have such a great content output strategy. So go and watch them, take notes as you watch and you see their content output strategies, because there's a lot to learn from following Frontier Alliance International. When I first found out about them a year ago, they had something like 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. A year later, at last count, they had around 65,000 subscribers and counting. I bet you they're probably over the 70,000 mark by now. That's an incredible following in a short amount of time for a small ministry with such a niche focus. But it shows what kind of attention you can grab when you think about your ministry as a media and storytelling ministry that just so happens to do whatever it is that you do. So definitely check them out and see if you can take any ideas from how they think through their content production. And then as a side note, instead of creating an app specifically for your ministry, they use an off-the-shelf product called Subsplash. So if that is something of interest for your ministry, definitely check Subsplash out. This is our story content map we've talked about a couple times throughout this course. If you're following along with this course with the downloaded presentation deck, just click on the calendar and it'll take you to the downloadable version of our site or on our site. Otherwise, go to our website, and this resource is free on our free resources page. We've put this content strategy map together as a guide and a starting point to help you create your own content strategy using the platforms you are already on. So feel free to fill in the platforms your ministry uses. I think I've shared this already, but this strategy map has 62 pieces of content from a single beneficiary story. And even if you only do half, again, only 32 or only 30 or only 15, whatever it is, in what we've outlined, then you'll have a lot more content than you currently have. So replicate this strategy every month, and you're going to fill out your entire year with storytelling content that's emotionally engaging. And if you want to take things further, you can add educational content on your cause, location, the people group, or any other educational content that is relevant to your ministry. Share some informational updates on your ministry throughout the year, and you'll have more content that you know what to do with. And if you're overwhelmed by all of this and asking how can I create this much content for a small ministry, this course is designed to work in tandem with our other storytelling courses that are designed to help your ministry partners grow in their storytelling skills so that they can help you with your content creation. So I hope this helps. I hope it's not overwhelming. Just start somewhere and work up to something like this. But get your ministry partners engaged, get your missionaries engaged, have them take our photography and film and script writing courses so that they can be creating content with you on your behalf, and it doesn't all rely on or depend on your marketing team or your leadership team to create and tell these stories. And that's all I have for you guys today. As always, if at any point you have additional questions or want to learn more about how Reliant can help you with your marketing and your storytelling, please don't hesitate to ask or give us a call. This is our ministry. This is the way that we are using our skills, our talents, and our abilities for the kingdom. So please grant us the opportunity to pour into you and your ministry so that we can all tell the stories of how God is working with greater efficiency and effectiveness for our ministries and for his glory. So thank you guys. We really appreciate you being a part of this course and taking this course and learning how you can tell your stories better for your ministry.